millions of people, and economic activity across the globe is plummeting. 80% of the global workforce have had their workplace fully or partially closed. And the International Labour Organization is projecting that 25 million workers may lose their jobs. CIVICUS Secretary-General Lysa John joins us now on SA Today. Thank you very much for coming, Lysa.
Hello.
Well, Lysa, first, I mean, the threat of unemployment is giving people stress, and with the prevailing atmosphere in the world business place, companies are under distress and employees are losing their jobs. Is there a way out when one has to suggest a solution?
Yes. Thank you for inviting me here. I think, when the global pandemic was announced, one of the things we kept hearing was that people were almost more afraid of losing their jobs than they were of catching or contracting the virus. And I think as a response to that, the evidence really shows that these fears are not unfounded. There are 1.6 billion people now, according to the latest ILO estimate, who are in danger of losing their livelihoods, a large portion of them in the informal sector. And essentially what this means is that you and me and the people we know, we may not be in direct contact with somebody who's contracted the coronavirus, but all of us know somebody in our friend circle or in our families who is either lost their job or is in fear of losing their livelihoods. So the Social Security Protocol, which is essentially a sector-based measure for non-profit organizations, we've been asking civil society organizations to endorse it, is really a response and is really an action that says that the COVID-19 pandemic is an unprecedented crisis. It's more complex than any of us have ever experienced in our lifetimes. And this therefore calls for exceptional leadership and solidarity measures.
Right, so governments, for example, here in South Africa, there had to be a process of rearranging and reprioritizing projects so that the budget can be consolidated to deal specifically with fighting the impact of COVID-19 in businesses and social welfare. So now, if you come up with social security protocol, what does it entail? Because we've seen that when people are not working and they don't have an income and they're relying only on food parcels, they're hard to control, and it's difficult to speak to them in an orderly fashion in terms of their discipline.
Yes. So I think essentially the reasoning is that governments have to do, kicking to action. They have to gear up to respond to the macroeconomic challenges. Their primary responsibility is, in fact, to people who are already unemployed, people who are in the informal sector or in the gig economy, and aren't hired by an organization as such. So in that context, I think companies and organizations in the nonprofit sector, we shouldn't need to wait for somebody else to tell us what to do. I mean, we need to do the right thing, as quickly as we can. And therefore, the protocol, in fact, has been in place for 4 weeks already for most organizations. There are several key measures that, the people who've signed up to the protocol have endorsed. Some of them include, for instance, ensuring that physical distancing measures are applied within the workplace, so transferring processes that can be done virtually in kind of a smooth and effective fashion. But more importantly, I think really ensuring that all workers who are currently on the payroll have their contracts protected. And CIVICUS, for instance, we've taken measures to extend even the contracts that were coming to an end this year have been extended till December 2020. We are a very small organization. Most of the organizations who've endorsed the protocol from across the world are small organizations in the global south with very limited resources. If we can step up and do this, I really don't see why other sector bodies cannot do the same. It's really a moment for us to ensure and assure people who work with us that their security and their safety is top of mind, and that we will be doing all we can to ensure that reserves that are available in terms of resources and funding that organizations have are put to protect people first.
But Lysa, you know that the harsh realities of the world of business right now is if your company is being liquidated and you have to shut down, you're going to have to let the employees go. So how do you then push the narrative of job safety? How do you then argue for saving jobs if a company has shut down? So the issue of the impact of COVID-19 is upon us in terms of the operating environment. If you take a look at the downside of production where there is no demand, a company may be having stock, but due to the lockdown, perhaps level 4 in South Africa doesn't suit that company and it has to shut down. How do you campaign for the safety of jobs?
So, as a person who runs an organization myself, I'm pretty sure that there's no organization in the world that works on the basis of a monthly budget, right? You always have an annual budget. You have at least 3 months of your operating costs in place in order to run your organization. So unless you were already going through a bankruptcy process or you had declared yourself as not having any income, it's really not possible that in 1 month's time you suddenly don't have the ability to sustain any of your operations. And even if that has happened, I know that South Africa, there has been a call for companies to access the UIF, for instance, but a lot of other countries are also putting in place unemployment allowances. And this is really a pivotal moment for us to be working with governments and ensuring that social protection systems are in place so that on one hand, organizations are using all of their resources, all of the flexibility they have to protect people, particularly during the lockdown period, where it is practically impossible for anyone to walk out and find a new job. On the other hand, I think we need those backup systems where health insurance, unemployment-related allowances, other kinds of benefits that allow people to kind of manage and mitigate the crisis in their own lives is possible. And I'm not an economist, but I know that you do need to protect jobs in order for the economy to bounce back. So if we want to build back better, if we want to emerge stronger, then everybody has to do their bit to ensure that incomes are flowing, incomes are maintained, and therefore we will all grow back better.
Yeah. When you approach the argument of employee safety and job security, I mean, like we have a court case that has just taken place in South Africa here. I'll tell you a little bit about it. For example, we had AMCU taking the Department of Minerals and Energy to court, saying that there needs to be binding regulations for possible criminal actions of mine bosses if they didn't comply with regulations. Whereas on the other hand, the department is arguing that the regulations already gazetted were enough and there was no proof that mine bosses would not comply. So what do you say where employers and employees, of course their rights being advocated for by unions, indicate a certain element of distrust, that unions are not okay with the notion of workers going back to work, but their safety not guaranteed and the matter lying in front of the courts?
So I think this level of tension and conflict is something you're seeing across the world. I mean, people are desperate. I mean, there is simply no way for people to get alternate sources of employment. And I think for organizations, it's really a moment to put, again, to demonstrate leadership and solidarity, to really do the right thing by your people. For a lot of the organizations who signed up to the protocol, we are not massive corporations, we are small organizations. But people did reach out. They were afraid that this would create all kinds of unrealistic expectations. They were afraid of how people would react. And given the context that some of the non-profit organizations who've signed up don't have resources to even sustain themselves beyond this year. But I think everybody who's actually taken the right action and been transparent about what their situation is, been forthcoming about how they're going to support workers to transition this period. Those are the organizations that have actually experienced a positive and a productive flow of energy and work in the organization. I think building that base of authenticity and that base of solidarity in all of our organizations, that's the sign really of a progressive organization. And those are the kind of organizations that are not only going to survive this crisis, but will survive future crises, because that's the kind of organism we need in our economies to drive us forward.
All right, just your parting shot, I just want to get your feeling around this. I mean, like, if you woke up in South Africa this morning and you saw how people were disregarding, safety regulations concerning the spread of COVID-19. I mean, people are not listening. And even when they know what is happening in Italy, in Spain, in the US, that people are dying, South Africans are just having a walk in the park. They just don't give a DAM when it comes to compliance. What do you say about this? Others are not wearing masks and so forth. And for level 4 to be at this stage, I mean, like a discussion that it could be reversed to level 5. What comes to your mind when you see people just being complacent and being incalcitrant, not caring about being infected by this virus?
So, I do live in Johannesburg and I've come here from India. So I think actually, for me, your reality is shaped by what you choose to look at. And I think around me in my neighborhood, for instance, I do see people following the guidelines. I am actually quite impressed by the level of information that the government is sharing, the fact that you have your labor minister calling on companies and saying, access the UIF, make sure people are getting social security benefits. This is a time for social solidarity. That is quite progressive. And I think on the continent as a whole, what we're seeing is, it's probably the first time that leaders, finance ministers across the continent are working together, are really trying to figure out how we have macroeconomic measures like debt relief or a pause on debt repayments, which will ensure that we come out of this stronger. That might sound, very optimistic. It might sound very unrealistic. But we are also an organization that monitors human rights violations across the world, so we know exactly what governments are doing. And I think that, just the foundations of democracy, I think, and people's movements in South Africa actually put you in a much better place than a lot of other countries.
Lysa, your time is appreciated. Thank you so much and keep safe.
Thank you. You too.
All right, CIVICUS Secretary-General Lysa John speaking to us right here on SA Today. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back after this. Don't touch that remote control.